Very much, Jim, with the word that that isn't happening. Let me bring in two voices: Michael Crowley, Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for Time, and Frank Gaffney, Jr., President for the Center for Security Policy and former Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Ronald Reagan. So, gentlemen, welcome to you. And here we have it. You know, the word just into CNN that they will not be meeting, no handshaking, while they're there in New York this week. And Michael, your reaction to that?
Well, I think expectations got built up for the handshake, and I think there was people were ready to believe that it was going to happen. It's not, but it was going to be really complicated. Just the pure logistics of getting the two guys in the same room at the same time. I think they would have liked to have done it without a lot of press around to make sure that there were no awkwardness. There was no awkwardness or weird photo ops. So finding that moment where you can thread that needle, and then you have little problems like alcohol being served at the lunch, becomes almost insurmountable. But the last thing I would say is that was not going to be the substantive thing that would happen. It will happen when John Kerry sits down with the P5+1 nuclear negotiators, and the Iranian foreign minister and nuclear negotiators, Arif, will be there, and that's when they can really talk some turkey. A simple handshake would have been purely symbolic today.
So the needle won't be threaded, as you point out, though. There does appear to be some sort of breakthrough. But Frank, reading your piece in the Washington Times in your first graph about this metaphor, evoking Charlie Brown and Lucy with, Barack Obama and Rouhani, do me a favor and explain where you were going with that?
Well, let me just first of all say thank God for alcohol. I think it's important that we not have had this even symbolic gesture of a opening of relations with Rouhani. This is a man, after all, who is presiding over a regime that is still engaged in terrorism, still engaged in various acts of subversion, including in our own hemisphere, still engaged in efforts to build and proliferate chemical weapons, biological weapons, even nuclear weapons. And we're seeing the president say, well, he sent a nice tweet or letter or op-ed, done some interviews. That's the basis on which we're going to now end effectively, symbolically at the very least, the isolation that this regime has been, I think, properly exposed to. And Lucy and the football is a metaphor that everybody's familiar with. They promise again and again and again, these Iranians, whichever variation you wish, to be better, to be more tractable, to enter into negotiations. But as with poor Charlie Brown, who keeps winding up flat on his back, we're going to see this football swept away again. And more to the point, the nuclear weapon that will be inevitably brought to fruition in the Iranian Islamic Republic coming, I think, to pass, and unfortunately probably being used.
Michael, Frank's not alone in his deep skepticism. You hear, from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying, listen, Rouhani is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Is there anything we know about Rouhani that might suggest otherwise, that he is being genuine, that Barack Obama will not end up flat on his back wishing he had the football, to go with his metaphor?
Right. It's very difficult to say what his true intentions are. He has done everything so far that would be consistent with someone who's being sincere and who wants to deliver and who wants to make a deal. But if you listen to the rhetoric from the Obama White House, they're not kind of swooning here. They're not being starry-eyed. I think they're very careful about not coming across as naive. I thought the president's speech today was a little bit cooler on the idea of a breakthrough, of the possibility for diplomacy than it might have been. There was definitely real wariness in his comments, just as there has been, even as White House officials talk about the possibility that there could have been some kind of meeting in New York this week. A lot of caveats, and they always come back to the idea of deeds being more important than words, and wanting to see whether Iranians have substantively changed their negotiating position. So I think that just remains to be seen.
No, I think on that point, Frank, you get the last question, which is, talk about words versus deeds. What is it that what is it that the president of Iran here would need to do to perhaps change your view? Not rhetoric, not promises, but what actions would you need to see for U.S., for the administration to be able to trust him?
Well, two things. To speak to your previous question to Michael, this is a guy we actually do know something about. He has bragged in the past on Iranian television about having bought time for the Iranian nuclear program to be completed by going through precisely the kind of subterfuge he's engaged in right now. What would it take to make a difference? Well, I'm a little reluctant about getting into the John Kerry mode about Syrian chemical weapons, but let me just say, if he were to actually rip up by the roots this nuclear weapons program, and that's what it is. I mean, only the most fatuous and naive believe this is still just about peaceful nuclear energy. The centrifuges, the secret facilities in which many of them, I believe, are housed, the plutonium program, on and on, the ballistic missile program, the sorts of things, sarin gas, Reza Khalili talked about in a piece yesterday, that is actually being produced by the Iranian regime. All of these things are the sorts of things that would be tangible manifestations of a real change. The problem is Rouhani doesn't run the Iranian Republic. The supreme leader does, and unless Khamenei says something different, we're going to see more of the same, more of the bait and switch, more of the Charlie and the football from Rouhani.
Frank Gaffney, Michael Crowley, thanks to both of you.